In this video, we are going to see the backward and compatible changes and the new features of PHP 7.3 starting from PHP 7.2. In order for me to have two versions of PHP, I'm going for Docker. I have created two services, PHP 72, which will be running PHP 7.2 CLI, and PHP 73, which will be running PHP 7.3 CLI. Now down here I have two terminals. In the first terminal, I'm going to run docker compose exec PHP 72 bash, which is a command that is going to give me access to a container of this service over here, PHP 72. So if I execute this command and run php-v, I'm going to have PHP version 7.2. I'm going to do the same for PHP 7.3 and then run php-v and verify the version. I have PHP 7.3. Now that we have two versions of PHP against which we can execute our scripts, let's see the first new feature, which will be concerning the HeroDoc and NowDoc syntax. So many PHP developers refrain from using HeroDoc and NowDoc syntax because of two rules that make their code a little bit ugly. The first rule is that we cannot indent the ending marker of our HeroDoc. Say that I have getAllUsers function. This function will be containing some SQL. I'm going to put that in a HeroDoc. So this will be my HeroDoc, select all from users. And I want my closing marker to be indented, except that this code is not going to work in PHP 7.2. Why? Because I have this indentation over here. I'm going to remove it and it will work. So I'm going to put again this indentation and execute the same code in PHP 7.3 and this will work. Why? Because PHP 7.3 simply has removed this rule. That's the first rule that have been removed for PHP 7.3. Now note that if I indent my closing marker, I'm going to see all my lines of my HeroDoc stripped x spaces, x being the number of spaces that I'm introducing in my closing marker. So all the spaces will be removed. We can see that in the var dump, I see that I'm dumping the s straight away. There is no spaces between the double quotes and my s. It's also visible in the from. So I have all those spaces stripped away because my closing marker is also indented at this level. Now for PHP 7.2 we don't have that because the dump have spaces between the double quotes and the select. Now let's comment this code and go to the second rule. So the second rule for the HeroDoc and NowDoc syntax is that there is no need now to have new line after the ending marker of my HeroDoc. This code over here again is not going to work in PHP 7.2. Why? Because I have this comma just after the ending marker of my HeroDoc. If I have a new line straight after my ending marker, this is going to work, which is kind of ugly. Now let's re-put this comma in the same line with the ending marker and see if this is going to execute in PHP 7.3, and yes, it is working. So the requirement for a new line after the ending marker is now removed in PHP 7.3. Now this comes with a backward and compatible change that we are going to see in a few minutes. The second feature concerns instance of. Before PHP 7.3, instance of can only be used on objects. Now it is possible to use it also on literals. So let's try this code. In PHP 7.2, this is probably going to give me an error. And indeed it gave me an error saying fatal error, instance of expects an object instance constant given. Now in PHP 7.3 this will execute and is going to probably give me false. So let's try that out, and yeah, it is executing, so no error and it is false. The third change is concerning trailing comma in function calls. In PHP 7.2, if I put a comma at the end of my function call, I'm going to have an error. Let's try that out. I'm going to have a parse error. Why? Because I have this comma over here. Now if I execute the same code in PHP 7.3, I'm not going to have an error. So in the same way that we have allowed in PHP 7.2 trailing comma in grouped namespaces, you can check out that video if you are interested. I'll be linking it in the description below and in the suggestion area. We also have allowed the comma to be called, we have also allowed the comma to be introduced at the end of a function call. The fourth change concerns some helper functions that have been introduced, such as array key first and array key last, which will allow us to get the first and the last key of an array. Those two functions, of course, do not exist in PHP 7.2. So if I execute this code over here in PHP 7.2, I'm going to have call to undefined function. And if I execute this in PHP 7.3, I'm going to have the first and the last key of my array, which are A and B. The last change that we are going to see here, and of course, this is not the absolute list of changes, you can check them out in the documentation that I will be linking in the description, is countable. Is countable is going to tell me whether a variable is countable or no, meaning that this variable is an array or an object that implements the countable interface. So null, for example, 1 abc as string and new std class are not countable. So all those calls are going to give me false. And if I have a new anonymous class that implements countable or an array, I'm going to have true. This code is not going to execute in PHP 7.2, of course, because this function has not been introduced yet. But in PHP 7.3, if I execute the same code, I'm going to have false, 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 which are all those items over here, and then two trues, which are an object implementing countable interface and an array. That's it for the new features. Now we are going to go to backward and compatible changes. The first backward and compatible change is concerning the herodoc and nowdoc syntax. As we already seen in the new features over here, we have removed two rules to be able to use the herodoc and nowdoc syntax with a beautiful code. The second rule being that there is no need for my ending marker to be in a separate line. Now that will be introducing a small backward and compatible change if I have my ending marker somewhere in my herodoc syntax. Say that I have it here, just after the from. My herodoc now will be only this part over here. So all this part is going to be ignored and not considered in my herodoc, and therefore my PHP script is not going to work. So one solution would be to choose a marker that does not exist in the herodoc itself. That's for the first backward and compatible change. Now the second backward and compatible change is the issue of warning when I have continue within a switch case. Say that I have an array that contains a string, unwanted value, and then ABC, and I'm going to for each on this array and display only ABC. I don't want this wanted value to be displayed in this echo over here, and I want to use this syntax over here. So I'm going to for each then switch the item. If it is unwanted value, I'm going to continue. You might think that this will work and will not show me unwanted value. Let's try that out in PHP 7.2. So if I execute this code over here, I'm not going to have unwanted value not displayed. So it is indeed displayed. Why? Because the continue over here is going to continue on the switch itself, not the for each. If I want the unwanted value to not be displayed, I should have continue to. So I want to have the continue on the second level, which is the for each. So if I execute this code again, I'm going to have ABC only and the unwanted value filtered away. Now in PHP 7.2, as we saw, we had no warning whatsoever. Now let's remove the 2 over here, because the warning is when we have only continue, and execute this code in PHP 7.3. I'm going to have a warning, continue targeting switch is equivalent to break. So this continue over here for PHP is equivalent to break, and now in PHP 7.3 we got an explicit warning saying that, because it almost in all the cases causes unexpected behavior for developers. The third change is for static properties reference assignment, which is kind of a bug that got fixed in PHP 7.3. So say that I have a test function that contains a public static attribute, which is x. This x will be equals to 0 in our case for test. And then I have a second class test2 that will be extending test. So test2 is going to have an attribute also x, which should be equals to 0. Now I'm going to assign for test2x to the address of y, and then y will be equals to 1. If I want to dump test and test2x, which should be the same value because we have x equals 1 and then we have assigned to x the value of 1 through reference assignment, I should be having 1 for test x and 1 for test2x, but in PHP 7.2 this is not the case. So if I execute this code over here, I'm going to have 0 for test and 1 for test2. So test x remained 0. This behavior has been fixed in PHP 7.3. So if I execute again, I'm going to have 1 and 1. So that's a small fix of strange behavior. The last change that we are going to see here, and of course this is not the definite list of changes, you can check them out in the PHP documentation that I'll be linking in the description, is concerning the unpacking of non-integer keys. Say that I have a variadic function called foo. This function will be taking a non-fixed number of arguments. Then within foo, I'm going to simply dump the arguments that I'm receiving. I have also a function called gen, which will be generating a key value, key being 1.23 and the value 123, using the yield keyword. In PHP 7.2, we are allowing the call of foo with the unpacking of the result of gen. This will work and will give us 123 for the unpacking of gen. So if I execute this in PHP 7.2, I'm going to have an array with 123. But there is a rule in PHP 7.3 saying that we cannot unpack an array that has a non-integer keys, and here we are doing that. So to be coherent and don't have exceptions, this have been removed in PHP 7.3, and this call will be generating an error saying that we cannot unpack an array with non-integer keys. So just execute this code, and we do have a fatal error saying cannot unpack traversable with non-integer keys. So that's the last change over here. Thank you all for watching. I will be asking some questions to help you stick some information that we have seen together in this video. Feel free to answer them in the comments section.